Then he goes on to tell about the orchestration of the LA riots and how Detective Brown from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department stated that there was more behind the riots than the public knows. He revealed that known agitators from the Revolutionary Communist Party, Socialist Workers' Party, Progressive Labor Party, Socialist Organizing Network were there to press for a riot before it started, and some members of these organizations participated in the rioting, looting, and arson. And then he tells about the drive for gun control, and he asks his fellow policemen, are you going to turn your guns on those citizens that you are called upon to arrest by the New World Order? Here's what Thomas Jefferson said, no free man shall ever be debarred from the use of arms. The strongest reason for the people to retain their right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny in government. That's Thomas Jefferson. Not to just have them for hunting purposes, but this is what Thomas Jefferson said the reason was. Samuel Adams said, the said Constitution shall never be construed to authorize Congress to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Patrick Henry said, the great object is that every man be armed. Everyone who is able may have a gun. James Madison said, Americans need never fear their government because of the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation. James Madison is the one who basically wrote the Constitution. Vladimir Lenin said, one of the basic conditions for the victory of socialism is the arming of the workers, the communist workers, and the disarming of the bourgeoisie, the middle class. Leo Tolstoy said, governments need armies to protect them against their enslaved and oppressed subjects. Joseph Stalin said, if the opposition disarms, well and good. If it refuses to disarm, we shall disarm it ourselves. And a female student from Beijing read China after Tiananmen Square described her parents' last words to her, tell the American people never to lose their guns. As long as they keep their guns in their hands, what happened here will never happen there. Well, this is, of course, from the perspective of the world, and our work is to call people out of this world to the heavenly kingdom. But this tells us what is happening when we have in our Congress now a joint resolution, 81, in the House to repeal the Second Amendment. Well, let's go to Waco, if you'd like to now, John.
Well, Bob, this just leads right up to Waco. The whole reason that the BATF, I've heard it ATF and BATF. Yeah. One is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. One just Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Right. Whether you want to say BATF or ATF, I understand that this organization, the reason that they came upon the situation in Waco, that it all started, was because David Koresh and the group there at Mount Carmel Center were stockpiling this mammoth amount of weapons, and that's just what you've been talking about here. And I want to repeat what you said at the beginning of this video, that our weapons of warfare are not of this world. What are our weapons, Bob?
Spiritual weapons. Spiritual the Word of God, the Holy Spirit, the truth. The truth.
That's right. And I just want to make sure that there's not one person out there who misunderstands what is being conveyed by the things that you just read, that they are not to go out there and start stockpiling weapons, that this is a situation of we, as historic Seventh-day Adventists, must depend upon the Word of God and inspiration as our
And the angels
weapon.
are our protectors.
Absolutely.
Over and over again, Ellen White says that the angels will be our protectors at the end of time, and we are assured that nothing can happen to us except by Christ's permission. Amen. When we are in His hands, when we are surrendered to Him. So that's our defense. Now, about this situation in Waco, Tex Mars has put out a very interesting audio tape about this, and in that tape he reveals a number of very interesting things. For one, the average Texan has 4 guns, firearms. Some of them have 50 to 60. Texas is known for this. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms report. Actually, it's a report of the Department of the Treasury on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms investigation of Vernon Wayne Howell, also known as David Koresh, tells us that about a year before the storming of the Waco group, the Branch Davidians, they had 87 weapons on their grounds, which is less than one. Less than maybe, what, 18, 20% of what the average person in Texas has. Then what happened, and it comes out in this report, what happened was that the SWAT teams began doing practice runs, practice attacks right virtually next door to the Branch Davidians. And Koresh saw this, and he...
You think that was an accident?
No. They did this repeatedly, and he concluded that they were planning to attack him.
Whenever the United States military is being brought into a troubled area, they always say that it's for war maneuvers, that it's for training, practice and training operations. But they are in there in that vicinity for one reason, and that is to intimidate those that see it.
That's right.
And it was the same reason with this thing with
That's
David
right.
Koresh.
And so what did he do? He beefed up the number of weapons he had to somewhere around 200, which would be still half of what it was, Texan. Half of the normal Texan.
Okay, the normal Texan had how many guns?
4.
Normal, and this ratio
was
at
2.
Mount Carmel Center was 2 per person.
So it's hard to believe that they really were going in there because of an enormous stockpile of weapons.
Why were they going in there, Bob?
All
What's
right.
the real reason?
That is a very interesting, and I think there's more than one answer to that.
Just like the USA Today said, I don't know where
it's
it
another
was,
one
that said, you know, that they caught them lying. Everything about Waco was a big bunch of lies.
Yeah.
So what's the real reason? Why did they go in there?
Well, I'll follow one line first, one line of evidence, and perhaps I'll get another magazine here to illustrate this. And this magazine tells... Go ahead, John.
You know, there have been several videos made already.
Yes.
This attorney, what's her name?
Linda Thompson.
Linda Thompson.
She's very highly trained, incidentally. She has a doctorate.
I saw that video of hers, could not believe the evidence that she'd uncovered.
Yeah, we're carrying it at BSI. And people are ordering it like hotcakes.
Should we show any of the clips of that?
Sure, I think you ought to show some of the clips of that. That clearly demonstrates that Koresh did not claim to be Jesus Christ.
In February 1993, approximately 130 men, women, and children lived in a large house just outside Waco, Texas, on property they called the Mount Carmel Center. The leader of this group was 33-year-old Vernon Howell, who later changed his name to David Koresh. David believed he had been asked by God to deliver the message of the book of Revelations in the Bible to the world. Rachel, David's wife, and their 3 children also lived at Mount Carmel. The Mount Carmel property was established as a religious retreat by its founders in 1935. Followers came to be known as Branch Davidians. In 60 years, there had been only one incident in an otherwise unblemished record of the Branch Davidians' peaceful existence with their neighbors. Former leader George Roden's wife gave leadership of the group to Koresh. Roden then unearthed a dead woman in her coffin and challenged Koresh to see who could raise the dead woman. Koresh called the police, who said they needed evidence. Koresh and several followers went to the ranch to take pictures of the coffin, and Roden opened fire. Roden was shot in the finger. Koresh and 7 others were arrested. All were later acquitted. Former leader George Roden also accused David Koresh of getting his 75-year-old mother pregnant.
He raped my mother.
In response, David replied,
"If I took a 70-year-old woman and got her pregnant, you better watch out. I'm God."
This statement, obviously said sarcastically, was repeated out of context over and over in the news media and by the FBI in the next weeks to portray David Koresh as having claimed he was God. Many people at Mount Carmel held responsible jobs in the outside community. Wayne Martin was a well-known and respected Harvard-educated lawyer. Sherry Jewell was a computer analyst and teacher. David Jones was a mailman. Mike Schroeder and Woody Kendricks were craftsmen. Church services were no different than what you'd expect at any church service.
His tongue is the pen of a ready writer. So how's God going to talk to me in the latter days?
He's going to be ready.
And who's going to bring that book? So there'll be no excuses.
The Branch Davidians were well liked by many of their neighbors. And the Branch Davidians had some distinguished neighbors over the years. Texas Governor Ann Richards grew up in Waco. William Sessions was the mayor and a judge in Waco before he became director of the FBI. ATF Director Stephen Higgins and FBI spokesman Bob Ricks both attended Baylor University in Waco. And President Clinton recently appointed a new commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. She, too, is from Waco. The house was built by the labors of the people who lived there. What happened to target these seemingly peaceful and religious people for the wrath of the United States government? Around 1987, Mark Breaux, a self-proclaimed prophet from Honolulu, Hawaii, joined the Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel. He was asked to leave in 1989 when he tried to take over the leadership of the Mount Carmel Center from David Koresh. Mark Breaux vowed revenge. He called several international agencies and made allegations against David Koresh of adulterous sex, child abuse, and gun stockpiling. One of the groups he contacted was Cult Awareness Network, a group that helps to arrange kidnappings and deprogramming of people who join religious groups. Deprogramming is a form of brainwashing. Cult Awareness Network pushed for investigations of the Branch Davidians. In 1992, Mark Breaux was provided a golden opportunity to get his revenge when a disc jockey named David Jewell became embroiled in a custody battle with his wife, Sherry Jewell, a Branch Davidian who lived at Mount Carmel. Mark Breaux approached David Jewell's mother to tell his sordid tales of sex, abuse, and guns. He then later testified at the custody hearing. In an interview with an Australian network in 1991, David Koresh himself answered these claims.
How many wives do you have?
One.
One wife.
One wife.
Have you committed?
Always had. Have I committed adultery? Is what you're fixing to have?
Have you committed adultery?
No, I don't commit adultery.
You telling me the truth?
I'm telling you the truth.
Have you beaten children?
No, I do not beat children.
I think the girl's name was Aisha.
Yeah, was her parents there? Her parents were there.
Did you do it?
No, I didn't do it.
Nonetheless, these very same allegations made their way into the search warrant affidavit written by alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agent Davy Aguilera on February 25, 1993. The ATF is responsible for seeing that taxes are paid on certain types of guns and enforcing federal gun laws. Why would these allegations be included in an application to search for weapons violations? The ATF has no authority to investigate child abuse or polygamy. And these allegations were investigated by the Texas Welfare Department and the McLennan County Sheriff's Department in 1991 and 1992 and were found to be baseless. Parts of the search warrant affidavit by Agent Aguilera were false. Here, Agent Aguilera refers to Shotgun News, a national newspaper with a circulation of 150,000 that is sold at newsstands all over the country. He calls it a clandestine newspaper. The affidavit describes how an undercover agent had observed the upper and lower receivers of disassembled AK-47s. The AK-47 has a one-piece receiver. There are no separate upper and lower receivers on an AK-47. Obviously, Agent Aguilera didn't have a clue, and Magistrate Green failed to notice. Agent Aguilera also stated that a neighbor heard machine gun fire, but he didn't state that the McLennan County Sheriff had already investigated this claim and found that David Koresh had a legal device called a Hellfire trigger that merely sounds like a machine gun, but is perfectly legal. Machine gun fire in itself is not evidence of illegal activity. It is legal to own a machine gun if the owner pays a $200 tax on the gun. But there was no evidence the Branch Davidians owned any machine gun at all. So, bottom line, the raid on February 28, 1993 was launched because the ATF merely suspected that the Branch Davidians might have a machine gun that they had failed to pay a $200 tax on. Branch Davidian Paul Fatta, who was responsible for many gun purchases, states categorically,
There is no 50 caliber machine gun out there. There is a 50 caliber gun that's a semi-automatic that was bought perfectly legal.
Aguilera also failed to mention that in July 1992, the ATF had inspected Hewitt Arms, a gun and gun parts store in Waco where the Branch Davidians had purchased 225 guns. Henry McMahon, the former owner of Hewitt Arms, told Pete Zaralis of the Mobile Press that when the ATF agents visited Hewitt Arms in July 1992, "I called David and told him the agents have a problem with you buying so many guns. He said, tell them to come on out." The ATF agents declined this offer. Magistrate Dennis Green, the only U.S. magistrate in Waco, and himself a former U.S. attorney, issued the search warrant for the Mount Carmel property. An article in the August 30th, 1992 Waco Tribune-Herald revealed that the small town of Waco had an extraordinarily high rate of federal gun prosecutions compared to the rest of the nation, under the direction of Bill Johnstone, the U.S. attorney in Waco. This high rate of prosecutions in Waco for gun law violations may well come from the ATF's and Magistrate Green's ignorance of federal gun laws. Although Agent Aguilera claims in the affidavit to be experienced and to know about federal firearms laws, he confuses the meanings of the words machine gun, destructive device, explosive, and explosive device, all of which have different, specific meanings in the federal law books. Magistrate Dennis Green failed to notice. Nonetheless, reporters at the Waco Tribune-Herald began a scandalous series of articles about the Branch Davidians the day before the ATF raid. The reporters claimed to have interviewed former cult members. The allegations sounded amazingly like the allegations of Mark Breaux and the Cult Awareness Network members. This diagram depicts the house at Mount Carmel as it appeared on the day of the raid by ATF on February 28, 1993. In press accounts, the ATF claimed that the raid was moved up a day after the ATF learned that the Waco Herald-Tribune had started its series the day before. This was the first of many outright lies. The warrant would expire if it was not served by February 28th, and the raid took place on February 28th. What you are about to see is the first film footage of the initial raid as it was provided to all the network television feeds. This film was heavily edited by someone before it was distributed across the networks. It contains obvious glitches where film has been cut out, but even this editing wasn't enough to remove the truth. We'll show these next 3 scenes 3 times. Watch closely. In the opening scene, agents are in position behind cars, shooting at the front of the house, as 2 teams of 4 agents climb ladders on the side of the house to the roof. Now we'll replay what you just saw. Notice that there are no bullets hitting the ground or cars around any of these ATF agents. The 3 dark dots low on the horizon are helicopters. The sound of automatic weapons is coming from the M16 and MP5 machine guns used by the ATF agents. In the next scene, 2 teams of 4 agents were supposed to secure the roof within 30 seconds of arrival. Notice that no one is shooting at these agents as they climb the ladders. Several of these agents are carrying fully automatic rifles. The agent at the top right side just managed to shoot himself in the leg. Did you see it? We'll watch that again. The 9mm pistols carried by the ATF have no safety protection on them. As the agent climbs the ladder, He reaches for his gun in the holster. It discharges, wounding him in the leg and causing him to slip. He is able to continue up the ladder, however. According to ATF spokesman Royster, the raid on Mount Carmel had been planned and rehearsed for months.
They drilled over and over again, and we had our plan down, we had a diversion down, all were put into effect, and they were waiting.
Next, we see 3 of the 4 agents on the roof breaking into the window.
Go back before I give me another tape then.
Let's watch this part again. No one is shooting at these agents. The shooting you were hearing is from the agents on the ground in front of the house. Notice that the agent is carrying 2 types of grenades on his belt. He also is carrying a smoke grenade. Both agents at the window toss in what appear to be smoke grenades. After these agents get through the window and into the room, you will briefly see the 4th agent on the roof, followed by one of those edited cuts in the film. The film picks up with the 4th agent tossing something into the room. It makes no sense for him to be throwing anything at all into a room where the 3 ATF agents have just gone, unless he intends to injure his own men. He also fires a machine gun into the room, twice without looking. We'll watch it at normal speed, then slow it down. Now let's watch it in slow motion. Here he tosses something and withdraws his hand from the window. Next, without looking, he fires a burst from his machine gun into the room. Someone begins shooting from inside and bullet holes appear in the wall. In the midst of this gunfire, 3 holes appear at the same time. The agent fires his machine gun into the room a second time. He's then hit by a round. The bullet strikes him in his helmet on the backside of his head. He falls to the roof and grabs his head. This agent is not hurt, and he later makes it safely down the ladder. Regardless of who is shooting from inside that room, this agent just threw what appears to have been a grenade and fired a machine gun twice into the room where his 3 fellow ATF agents have just gone. All 3 of the agents who were sent into the window were killed. All 3 were Bill Clinton's bodyguards during his presidential campaign. A 4th agent was killed that day before the shooting started as he exited the cattle car.
We're extremely proud of what happened out there, how our agents conducted themselves under some unbelievable circumstances. They did a fantastic job.
David Koresh says,
they fired on us first, but like I say, they were scared.
They had it planned for months, so I don't think there's really anything they did wrong. Like I said, they had bigger guns than we did.
Notice the MP5 and M16 machine guns and knife sheaths on these ATF agents who claim to have been outgunned. On the day of the raid, 29-year-old Mike Schroeder, a Branch Davidian, had left the Mount Carmel Center that morning to go to work in town. He learned about the raid on the radio. His wife, Kathy Schroeder, and their 4-year-old son were inside the Mount Carmel Center. Mike, along with Woody Kendricks and Norman Allison, attempted to go home. Mike was shot 7 times, once through his eye, another through the heart, and 5 times in the back as he attempted to climb over the fence. Norman Allison was captured immediately. He told the ATF that Mike Schroeder had been killed. The official lie, released to the news media, claimed that the men started a shootout as they tried to leave Mount Carmel. The story appeared on March 1st in the Associated Press and in the Waco Herald Tribune on March 2nd. But even this March 1st story reported that one of the 3 men was killed. Documents filed in Norman Allison's indictment also plainly show that the government knew the men were trying to get into the Mount Carmel Center, not shooting their way out. These documents also prove that the government knew on February 28, 1993, that Mike Schroeder had been shot. Yet Mike's body was left hanging on a fence for days. His family wasn't notified of his death until 5 days later. On the 5th day, Mike Schroeder's body, chewed by wild dogs and birds, was picked up on a grappling hook from a helicopter and transported like a side of beef on a meat hook. His mother was in Waco, and she was finally notified of his death by telephone. His wife inside Mount Carmel was never notified of his death by the FBI. Peter Gent's body was left atop a water tower. It fell apart and dropped to the ground when the feds attempted to lift it with a grappling hook. The Branch Davidians buried what remained of his body. 2 of the ATF's own agents sum up the ATF mentality pretty well.
And the thing that I find totally abhorrent and disgusting is these higher level people took that same oath, and they violate the basic principles and tenets of the Constitution and the laws and simple ethics and morality. That's what disgusts me.
In my career with ATF, the people that I put in jail have more honor than the top administration in this organization. I know it's a sad commentary, but that's my experience with ATF.
On the 4th day, Jeff Jamar of the FBI is brought in to be in charge of the operation, replacing the ATF. From this point on, all news people will be kept 3 miles away from the Mount Carmel Center. ATF agents armed with machine guns and state troopers are posted at roadblocks to keep citizens 5 miles from the Mount Carmel Center. The only news that anyone in the United States will receive will be the official version told by Agent Bob Ricks of the FBI. It is illegal to use military troops against United States citizens under the Posse Comitatus Act, 18, United States Code 1385, but the FBI brings in tanks from nearby Fort Hood, a U.S. Army installation, to surround the house. National Guard troops and military equipment can be used in drug interdiction activities. Even though there was never any question of drug activity at Mount Carmel, as a ploy to avoid criminal penalties imposed by the Posse Comitatus Act, the ATF claims there is a suspected methamphetamine lab. Yet even after Texas Governor Ann Richards becomes aware that she was deceived by the ATF into consenting to the use of the tanks, she does not order the tanks off the property. From now on, the Branch Davidians will have no contact with the outside world. The FBI orders all the utilities, lights, phone, water, gas, and plumbing to the house to be disconnected. A telephone wired directly to the FBI is put in place. The FBI sets up a steady stream of torture directed at the Branch Davidians, which included many small children inside the house. Bright stadium lights keep the house lit up 24 hours a day, as a loudspeaker blares sounds of rabbits being slaughtered, Tibetan monk chants, and Nancy Sinatra's song, "These Boots Are Made for Walkin'." One refrain of that song says, "I just found me a brand new box of matches, yeah, and if you play with fire, you know you're gonna get burned." Whenever a Branch Davidian falls into disfavor with the FBI, the tanks are used to crush the person's car, or in the case of the children, their go-karts as punishment. On March 27th, the London Times runs an article describing the equipment used by the FBI. The British Strategic Air Services sends a specially equipped plane to take thermal images of the insides of the house, allowing the FBI to see everyone who is inside by the heat reflected from their bodies. The FBI inserts fiber optic cameras into the walls of the house and into air vents. The fiber optic cameras are attached to transmitters that then broadcast the signal to the FBI receiver. The FBI can now see and hear everyone inside the house at all times. On April 19, 1993, the entire country saw live coverage of the fire at Mount Carmel. We were told that the FBI had decided to punch holes to insert a non-flammable CS gas to urge the mothers and children to come out. We were told this was done out of concern for the children. Shown here are some training scenes of the impact of CS gas on grown men. To understand the full impact of the following scenes, it is important to understand the layout of the Mount Carmel Center. The underground bunkers were not under the house. There was a cement tunnel that ran from a trap door in the end of the house out to two main underground shelters out in the yard, one of which was in front of the water tower. Anyone who was inside either one of the underground bunkers should have been untouched by either fire or smoke. In this picture, this end of the house is where the trap door to the underground bunker was. This film was taken long before 6 a.m. the morning before the fire started. There is a large hole at the base of the building, and the building has already been knocked off its foundation. There is a round hole in the side of the building. What appears to be a large blood splatter is visible on a wall on the other side. Something, perhaps a curtain, flaps from inside the building. Remember, with the sophisticated bugging and surveillance equipment the FBI used, the FBI knew where all of these people were at all times. They could see them and hear them. The underground bunker is in front of the water tower shown here before 6 a.m. This tank was over the tunnel to the underground bunker. For more than 2 hours, a tank is over the underground bunker or at the hole in the corner of the house at the entrance to the tunnel. Each time the tank opens, agents can be seen getting in or out, and the camera filming it conveniently cuts away. At approximately 6:10 a.m., smoke begins pouring from the underground bunker. None of the media mentions the fire in the underground bunker, yet this is when and where the first fire began and where many people lost their lives. The official version of when things began starts here around 6 that morning. There is a flag propped against the door. The flag is not black, and it is not wedged in the door as the media reported. It is a red and blue flag. Whatever it is, it appears to be a flag of a conqueror, not a flag set outside by the Branch Davidians. The first tank that is sent in is a tank retriever. It has no apparatus to insert any kind of gas. It appears at precisely the time the smoke you saw earlier was seen coming from the underground bunker. It is not making so-called small holes to insert gas. It is destroying the end of the house over the trap door that leads from the bunker, making sure that no one inside the now burning bunker can escape. A second hole is made in the side of the building, and a third hole is made at the front door. What these tanks are doing in each picture is collapsing the inside stairwells. The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. Watch carefully as the tank backs out of the house. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jets is plainly visible. In the scenes that were shown throughout the country as the location where the fire supposedly started, smoke comes out a second-story window. As flames erupt from the second-story window, watch as a tank appears around the corner. There is an agent on this tank, as if he had just leapt down onto the top of the tank. It is difficult to see the details on a television because the quality is poor, but in the studio, he can be seen removing a fireproof-type hood. Another man is seen on the roof. The FBI claims that this man is a Branch Davidian. However, watch as he jumps from the roof and walks away. The tape quality again is poor when it broadcasts on a television set, but in the studio, while he is on the roof, he appears to take off a jacket. He jumps and lands on his feet. He very calmly walks away. As he walks, he can be seen removing a hood. He also appears to be carrying a rifle in his right hand. As the fire burns, helicopters circle over the center with men pointing guns out of the open doorways. Before, during, and after the fire, none of the agents involved are at all concerned that there could be explosions or bullets in the house. In these next scenes, you can plainly see agents walking in and out near the fire. In any ordinary crime scene, great pains are taken to preserve evidence. Here, tanks methodically push what remains of the house and evidence into the fire. The fire takes less than an hour to burn down the entire center. The fire is still smoldering at 5 that evening as agents walk in and around the fire. It is obvious that there is no genuine concern over the supposed millions of rounds of ammunition. Even though the FBI and the media consistently referred to this cement building as the bunker, the real bunkers were underground, as you were shown earlier. Many of the bodies that were found in the underground bunkers, not in the well house. In one final crude and insensitive display, the ATF raised its flag in victory over the ruins of Mount Carmel before the day was over. One voice was heard that day telling the truth. Brad Branch, a Branch Davidian who had left the Mount Carmel Center before the day of the fire.
Now they're finishing off the job right now. They're destroying the crime scene. America, this is the biggest lie that's ever been put before the American public, ever.
The Branch Davidians would try through a circuitous line of reasoning to establish that he could be conceived of as the Lamb that would break the seals in the book of Revelation, but he did not claim to be Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. It also shows the tanks going in and the flames coming out of the flamethrower section in the front of the tanks as they would back out of the building. And she shows some amazing footage there which clearly demonstrates that the government murdered those people.
They're the ones that set the fires.
Yes, the CS gas that was used has been banned in international warfare, and the United States has signed that agreement. But they used it on women and children and the men there of the Branch Davidians. And I have here a detailed analysis of CS gas. Here, page after page of it. And the dispersant that was used, there was an explosive dispersant that was like coal dust that would explode when it came up against a flame, such as what they had in their kerosene lanterns. They knew that they had kerosene lanterns. They had all kinds of sophisticated surveillance equipment on them. But what has impressed me, John, about this Waco thing is I've seen the testimony of the people who were in the church there when the attack took place and were there for a portion of the time and then came out. A couple of women were interviewed, one by a talk show host and another one by Jan Markison. Both of these women were obviously very spiritual people. They were not loose people. They were not bawdy people. They were very conservative, very Bible-oriented, very humble and likable people. They were Sabbath keepers, and one of them testified that they considered themselves, first of all, Seventh-day Adventists, and second of all, Branch Davidians. Now, the Branch Davidians, I haven't studied a lot about their theology. As a result of this thing happening, I had a lady come up to me at the Santa Rosa camp meeting who apparently had been approached by them and had studied a little bit of their thinking, and it seems that they have this idea of certain geographical areas which are like little Davidic kingdoms that need to be protected at the end of time and are a place of protection for God's people at the end of time. She asked me about this, and I gave her the great controversy perspective and the Bible perspective, and she was very relieved. But when you understand, as Tex Mars points out, Vernon Howell took the name David Koresh. David, because he was conceiving of himself apparently as being some kind of a messianic figure that would deliver the Jews from Babylon, the Babylonian evil forces, and Koresh, because that is the Hebrew word for Cyrus, who is a deliverer of God's people from Babylon.
Isaiah 45.
And so what happened was, and a text goes to various, the International Jerusalem Post and other sources, and he finds out
Is this from Tex Mars?
He has an audio tape out on it. He said he was King of the Jews is the title of it.
Oh, wow. Tex Mars is our next guest here at
That's what I understand.
Prophecy Countdown, the end of this month.
That'll be very interesting. And he'll tell you, no doubt, more about all of this in detail, but I'll just give a few broad strokes of the pen here, and then get on to some other things because I don't want to be telling too much of his stuff here. But basically, he tells of how Koresh went over to Jerusalem, and he ran into difficulty with the administrators in one of the schools that he was attending. He attended 3 different universities over there studying Hebrew. And he was trying to recruit students or young people at the marketplace to his group. And that's what this paper tells about. Koresh recruited Jews in Israel. And the Jews are very good at intelligence. As you know, the Mossad is one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, one of the best as far as gathering information. They have probably had more assassinations in the United States and in Europe than any other intelligence agency, however, because they believe in doing in anyone that could be conceivably a threat to them. And their arm here in the United States is the Anti-Defamation League.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So they
work together. They work together. Now, you see, the Anti-Defamation League, according to texts and these sources of information, and the Cult Awareness Network moved against David Koresh. And what happened was Mark Barot, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, was a legally blind adherent of the Branch Davidians who wanted to take over from David Koresh in about 1989. Koresh asked him to leave, and he had to leave. But he was mad at Koresh, so he brought all these allegations. And most of the government BATF case against Koresh rests upon his allegations. You see, a disenchanted member of the Branch Davidians who was mad, who wanted to do him in, who brought allegations against him.
I can identify what's the word I'm looking for? Disenchanted former employees that wish to do their boss in. For some reason, I can identify with
Well, you read this report. This is about 500 pages long. I scanned through it, read the critical areas that I thought were critical, looked at the tables in the back, the analyses of the developments of things. Most of the BATF testimony, almost all of it, rested upon this disenchanted man's accusations. And Linda Thompson shows this fellow on the tape. You can see he's legally blind. His eyes are darting back and forth like the legally blind will do. And this report tells of how Koresh was investigated for a number of things. He was investigated for, when these charges started coming in, the Texas Department of Health and Social Services sent in investigators who investigated for 2 or 3 weeks to see whether there was child abuse, sexual abuse, and no.
So this was all these accusations that we heard on the media, child abuse, perverted sex with the different...
The other witnesses that Jan interviewed, for example, and others said there was none of that going on.
All these ridiculous charges, him claiming to be the Messiah and the people thinking of him as God. And
well, apparently there was some element to him conceiving himself as a messianic figure. And this was what made the Anti-Defamation League, apparently, and Mossad upset about him. There is a messianic expectation, it seems, in Israel at this time as we approach the turn of the millennium, and they saw that he was recruiting people. He was calling himself David Koresh, and he had kind of a messianic impulse there, and they were afraid this thing might get out of hand. He was recruiting apparently young people there, and they put spies on him. One spy lived with him. I can
identify with that too.
One spy lived with him, acting as if he was a convert, lived with him, slept in his home, ate at his table, drank with him, you know, did everything with him, but he was a spy. And Koresh comes back here, and according to Tex Mars, Koresh was ultimately planning to move his whole establishment over to Israel, and they were very alarmed about that. And when the BATF came up against him, what flag was flying? It was the Star of David. Sure. Star of David flying. So you see, and you think about the term branch Davidian. Now, I haven't studied their theology, but who is the branch?
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus is the branch, but they may conceive of him as a messianic figure, you see, in the Old Testament. Branch and Davidian kingdom being restored, you see, at the end of time.
Sure.
And that's another reason
he was going to reign on King David's throne.
And they called it Mount Carmel because this was the place of decision. You know, this was like Elijah calling the people to decision. And I imagine that there may well have been involved in their thinking, at least in some of them. It seems like there was some diffusion of understanding in different positions, but they seem to perhaps have the idea of protecting this geographic location, which was their little kingdom, Davidic kingdom here. And so, however, it must be noted that in the past, when the sheriff had come with any kinds of summons, David had always been cooperative. And Jan Markison tells me from his interviews down there, the people spoke very highly of him, that he had a very winsome manner, that he had very nice manners, he was very pleasant. In fact, some of these reports even tell how some of these agents would come onto their 77-acre ranch and go target shooting with David and found that he was an excellent shot. You know, they would do plinking and things like this. Other reports are that the neighborhood kids would come in and swim in the pond, you know, and their group would go out and paint people's houses and do this kind of thing. And there was, in general, a fairly good rapport there. It was quite a different picture than the demonization that took place with the media.
Absolutely.
And with the FBI. They painted him out as you know, they demonized him.
Yes,
it's the same thing as what they did with Randy Weaver in Idaho. Well, I'd like to give you an account here that comes from...
you know, I hesitate to identify with this because of the people... my enemies and our enemies that want to put and have put me in this category with David Koresh. But the way that I have been demonized by the corporate structure is unbelievable. I had one woman, you preached yesterday at Rolling Hills, and she is the mother of a Florida conference pastor. And she said, I turned in my membership form today in the offering plate to have my membership transferred to the Rolling Hills Seventh-day Adventist Church. She says there is going to be absolute war when my son finds out that I became a member of this church. But she says, I have been told so many evil things by my Florida Conference pastor's son and his wife and all his friends. And she says, I said, I'm going to go to the Rolling Hills Church and I'm going to see John Osborne and I'm going to look at all this stuff for myself. And she says, I have been for 2 weeks now. And she says, I have seen nothing but the most godly Seventh-day Adventist people, the most loving people, and the wonderful historic Adventist message that I knew as a child. And she says, I don't care what happens at home, I'm coming here. She says, I heard so many vicious and vile, she says, and they had made you out to be such a heinous monster. She said that I had to come see for myself if there was anybody that could be as terrible as what I heard about John Osborne. And she says, now I see it was nothing but a bunch of lies.
Sure.
And she says,
demonizing.
A bunch of lies. And she says they have so I can really identify with what you said. And I tell you, when our Adventist people realize how they have been lied to, and how that people who are doing nothing but giving everything that they have and willing to lay down their life for this truth have been demonized by the corporate structure, suddenly they begin to realize who's lying and who's telling the truth, who's of God and who's of the devil.
That's right. There's something interesting to note here too, and it comes out in the Department of the Treasury report on the BATF investigation, and that is that these people were Sabbath keepers.
That is amazing.
Randy Weaver was a Sabbath keeper.
Is that Randy Weaver? Now, in case there are some who are not familiar.
We'll get into that in detail in a little bit.
Because you mentioned Randy Weaver twice.
Yeah, I'm looking at Waco first, and then we'll look at Randy Weaver.
Okay. But he was a Sabbath keeper?
Yes. He was studying the Old Testament. From the information that's come into our office, he was trying to keep the commandments of God. He was trying to find God and obey the teachings of the entire Bible.
And the Branch Davidians were considered Seventh-day Adventists by the media. But yet I heard an interview on Jan Markison's video where the woman said that they could, former Branch Davidian, she says that they considered themselves Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah. That was their perception. Of course, they had some other ideas than Adventists.
Of course,
yes, yeah. But they considered themselves, first of all, Seventh-day Adventists and then Branch Davidians. Their first allegiance, they said, was to Seventh-day Adventist doctrine, which is very interesting.
In Ellen White.
Yes, Ellen White.
Had all her
Great
books
controversy.
Up there in, you know, I don't know if our people realize that they had the Spirit of Prophecy books at Mount Carmel Center that burned to the ground. These people considered themselves Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah. Yes, and also in the Warsaw, you got some footage there, John, about the attack on the Warsaw ghetto by the Nazi SS.
Yes.
They were Sabbath keepers.
Does that remind you of Waco? So,
I can never forget the Palm Sunday was the week of the uprising, and I was stationed for lookout a block away from the ghetto. And since it was on a Palm Sunday, I placed myself not far from the church. It was a normal Sunday. People were walking out, quite nicely dressed, walking out from the church. But around the church was a playground and a merry-go-round and all kinds of games. And people used to come out from the church, go out to these merry-go-rounds and to the playground with children and play. And across the street was burning the ghetto. And the Germans stationed their artillery around that square. And that's probably I will never forget my life. My loneliness of watching that burning ghetto, I among the Gentile population, where the music was playing. People were enjoying themselves on the merry-go-round with their families and children. The priest was outside the church, greeting all his parishioners coming out from the church. And nobody would say, stop the music, people are burning across the street. It was a normal thing for the Polish population to watch like their neighbors are being bombarded and being brought out by fire and by artillery and by airplanes, and life was going on normally. And I have to live now with all that memory of watching the way my clothes were perishing in the ghettos. And with this I have to live for the end of my life.
Remind you of Waco. So we
Sabbath
have
keepers.
So we have Sabbath keepers. We have Sabbath keepers from the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews. We have Sabbath keepers with Randy Weaver, and you're going to be telling about that.
He was a homeschooler also.
A homeschooler. And we have also Sabbath keepers at Waco, and they were homeschoolers.
Yeah.
Very not coincidental,
and
very amazing.
These Branch Davidians didn't harm anyone. No one considered them a threat. They were not hurting anybody in the community. Which raises the question, why were they then attacked the way they were? Why, if they had a search warrant, didn't the local sheriff's deputy go up and knock on the door and say, look, I've got this, we need to check a few things out? Why didn't they do that? They were not interested. In fact, it tells in here that they had decided that they would have resistance, and therefore they decided not to follow that route.
Have you told us what that book is yet?
This is the report of the Department of the Treasury on the BATF investigation of David Koresh.
Answer a question for me, Bob. In every one of those situations, in the Warsaw Ghetto, Randy Weaver, and with Waco, why did they invite the media in to cover?
That's right.
To
Good
cover
question.
the siege.
It's a terror tactic to make an example.
This is what we're going to do to these people who dare to resist us.
Yes, and they had the television cameras set up their hours in advance of the raid.
All three times, the Warsaw Ghetto, Randy Weaver.
I'm talking about the Waco thing. I don't know about the others.
But it's the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto. They invited the media in
yes.
of that.
Well, we have film of it.
Yes, that's how we just
You just
showed
got
the
it
clip.
from the National Archive.
Yeah.
Yes, you see, a congressman named John Dingell III wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal, which was published May 15 of this year, in which he likened the attack on Waco to the attack on the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yes, and rightfully so.
Down to the very specifics, step by step. Jan Markison has read it in his, so I'm not going to read it here, but I'm just referring to it, that even the same kind of pistols, the same kind of helmets, it was almost as if it was a 50-year celebration, because it was almost 50 years to the day. Not quite, but almost. And when the burning of the Holocaust took place. But it's interesting to note that 7 out of the last 8 times that the FBI has had a standoff with any group, they have burned them to the ground. And the one time they didn't was at Randy Weaver's, and at that time a helicopter with a pod of diesel fuel was flying over to douse the house so they could ignite it. And a newspaper man with a video camera ran out and waved his camera at the, and they were afraid of people seeing what they were doing, so they called off the dousing of the house with diesel fuel. But 7 out of the last 8 times this has happened. They want to destroy all evidence. Now, the people have to ask whether what the quote which we read at the beginning by Jerry Spence, the trial attorney that defended Randy Weaver, is true. Is the wolf staring us in the eye now? Have people felt insecure because of Waco and because of the BATF? Don McIlvaney, who edits a financial newsletter, global financial newsletter, he speaks all over the globe, says in his letter that 2,000 homes and businesses were invaded by the BATF. And John, we have, from 60 Minutes, we have a tape of the invasion of various innocent people's homes by the BATF.
Let's show
and you
that.
might want to show that.
I think we're going to do that right now, Bob.
Okay.
Willie Sutton said he robbed banks because that's where the money was. If Willie was alive, he'd probably be working for the government, because that's where the money really is. Last year, various government agencies paid crooks somewhere between $40 million and infinity. We don't know how much, no one will say. It was paid to so-called criminal informants for information on drug dealers. The information has led to enormous busts and to horrifying mistakes in which innocents paid dearly. We can't give you numbers because, again, the government does not keep track of its disasters. The biggest disaster may be the war on drugs itself. Over a decade, $100 billion has been spent, and more Americans are addicted than ever before. But you wouldn't believe it from watching television.
Please search warrant. Bad boys, what you gonna do?
Drug busts are television's meat and potatoes. Action guaranteed. And law enforcement, from county cops to the feds, bring us along to show one and all the taxpayers' money doing dangerous work. And most of all, they invite us in to record the result.
It's the biggest seizure of caps I've seen in 20 years.
Barely a week goes by without the record drug bust of the day, week, or century.
They need the numbers, they need the statistics. It's a business. In our country, it's a business now.
The agents are under pressure, career path pressure, to come up with bigger, more newsworthy cases.
And if they don't, somebody's in trouble.
Strange bedfellows. Eugene Iredale, a San Diego defense attorney, and Michael Levine. For 25 years, for 4 different agencies, America's top undercover cop. Both say the net result of the war on drugs is a bloated, corrupt bureaucracy, whose only measure of success is the big bust, the show.
The key to that show are criminal informants. They have the key. So it's a quid pro quo arrangement. You save our agency, you help us convince the American people that this drug war really works, and we'll get you off whatever charges we can.
Almost always paid informants. Paid sometimes enormous amounts. Interestingly enough, invariably paid in cash.
I would say that the career path for an informer, a criminal informer, is a lot more lucrative for that of an agent. Crime actually does pay.
Most exciting game in town.
Bill is not his real name. For 8 years, he was one of the government's favorite informants. Neither he nor his handlers will say how much he was paid. We do know it was plenty. For example, a $700,000 airplane like this one, a gift from the U.S. government. The Justice Department says during those years, as a pilot, he was also running one of the biggest cocaine rings in South Florida. He's in jail for that, facing possibly 10 life sentences. Were you running drugs while you were working for the government? For profit, for yourself?
It's pretty difficult to infiltrate these operations and without associating or being involved with drug trafficking or drug traffickers.
Did the government know everything that was going on, every step of the way?
No.
Bill says that it's on the record that agents gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. Like many informants, he, rather than agents, often seemed to run cases.
If an informer is slick enough and knows how to play the system enough, he can cleverly manipulate these people around and get them to violate their own rules and regulations.
We just seem to benefit each other, myself and the government agents.
The benefits to the government were busts. The benefits to Bill, according to the government, were this house on a private airstrip in Florida, at least 4 airplanes, and a ranch in Montana. Not every snitch gets to be as rich as Bill, but they all share one common quality. They are pathological liars. 7 a.m. Northern California, last Thanksgiving weekend.
The information that we received was that there was a drug lab in the process of cooking narcotics.
An informant had tipped off the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department about a drug lab operating from this remote farmhouse.
There supposedly was a biker type described as tiny, 6'5", 280 pounds.
Armed with a search warrant and ready for battle, the SWAT team moved in. Inside the house, Bill and Marion Hosselman were getting ready for breakfast.
I looked out the bathroom window and I seen these 2 pickup trucks parked across the street from our home. And then I'm sorry.
Okay.
Then I walked to the front door, and I seen these burly shadows standing there.
The SWAT team identified itself and demanded he open the door.
I says, I'm not letting you in. I don't know if you're telling me the truth. I don't know who you are. You could be robbing me. I says, I won't let you in. So I asked my wife, call 911.
Before she could get to the phone, the SWAT team battered down the door.
Can you imagine 8 masked men, guns, just getting hold of both of you, and one taking him one direction, one taking me the other direction.
And then one of them put his hand across my face, the other one knocked my feet out from under me, and I fell to the floor, and they were storming through the house. And I kept asking, what have we done wrong? I says, we don't hurt anybody.
For an hour, the Hasselmans were kept on the floor at gunpoint, their hands cuffed behind their backs. They listened as the SWAT team searched their house.
All I could hear these people say on their little radios that they have attached to them was negative, 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 negative.
One group of guys had you inside. There was another group came out here, is that?
Yes, and I thought to myself, oh, they're going to break another door down, so this is the door that they battered in. And you can see...
Well, they sure did a job on this one.
They did an excellent job. And my grandson...
An excellent search, maybe, but the SWAT team found no drugs, no drug lab, no 6'5" biker. Just a set of toy trains and a terrified retired couple. 5 days later, they were still trying to overcome the trauma. And 5 days later, the Sheriff's Department was still red-faced. Under Sheriff Crawshaw had the unhappy task of trying to explain why the informant was believed.
Well, specifically what he corroborated was, of course, a description and location of the house. The fact that there was a motorhome behind the house that couldn't be seen from the road. He described the dog that was at the house.
This is the vicious killer dog you were supposed to have,
Yes, right? This dog and 2 Rottweilers. I never heard of a Rottweiler.
The Hasselmans also have no idea who the informant might be, and the Sheriff's Department will not tell them. What's your best guess in hindsight, that he concocted the whole tale?
Yes.
I just hate to think what would have happened if the couple had been more panicked and went and reached for a gun.
I agree with you. I hate to think of that.
I was treated like a criminal for almost 2 days after this happened. In the emergency room, I can remember hearing conversation around me, and I remember somebody saying he was involved in a drug bust.
Don Carlson is the ultimate straight arrow. He almost did not survive his encounter with a federal drug task force last August. As an executive of Anacomp, a Fortune 500 company, he'd gone from work to dinner, then to his home in Poway in suburban San Diego. Federal agents watched him arrive. There, on an informant's tip that several hundred kilos of cocaine was stashed in the garage, protected by 4 armed guards. Around midnight, Carlson was asleep. The next thing he heard was his door being battered in.
I stood at the extreme end of that hallway and hollered as loud as I could, who's there?
Who did you think was out there?
I thought they were robbers, burglars. I thought my life was in danger.
And still no identification?
Nobody ever communicated with me that evening, period.
Carlson panicked, tried dialing 911, then went for his handgun, returned to the hall, and a bomb went off, something police call a distraction device.
And I fired twice at the front door.
Then what?
And then I'm almost immediately, I'm hitting this leg, and I returned.
He staggered back to his bedroom, dropped his gun, and collapsed. Twice more he was shot. As he lay bleeding on the floor, Carlson was handcuffed and shackled.
I thought I was in the middle of the worst nightmare I had ever experienced. And I do remember wondering what the hell this was. I did not know. I mean, I couldn't fathom it.
The feds were having their own nightmare. The same informant told them of another stash, So while one group of agents was breaking into Carlson's house, another group was breaking into this house a few miles away, and they too came up empty. But the results were a lot less tragic. There was nobody home. In fact, the house was vacant. So far that night, the government was batting 0 for 2. In some disarray, the agents picked up their informant, Ron Edmonds.
He said, somebody just got shot, and it's your fault. I said, hey, what? Somebody just got shot, and it's your fault. Somebody got to pay for it.
Ron spoke to a San Diego television station shortly after the raids. At the time, his identity was still protected by the government. The night of the raids, his government handler was not amused.
They claimed that I said at the office that I just picked our house randomly and told them to go in it. Oh, no, 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 no. There's a lot of things I might have said, scared as I was, but I don't think I necessarily said that like that.
It should have been clear by now that Ron was unreliable. But the very next day, agents confronted Tony and Michelle Jones. Ron had accused them of being major smugglers.
And at that point, I was just in what you might consider a complete state of shock.
Especially so because she herself is a deputy marshal, whose husband had met Ron at a gym. The cops searched the house and found nothing. The third phony accusation in 24 hours. She says had the SWAT team moved in on her the way they did on Carlson, she would have reacted like the cop she is.
I would have come out shooting because nobody bangs into your house at 12 o'clock at night, you know, and especially when you're not involved in anything and you have no suspicion that anything's going on. If your door's being knocked in, you know, you protect yourself.
The Joneses were furious. Don Carlson was fighting for his life. The government was investigating itself and their man Ron. He was a small-time crook with a record a mile long and a small-time snitch for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department in Tampa, Florida. When he moved to San Diego, he went big time as a federal informant. He said he knew all about a major cocaine cartel. They believed him and paid him.
I don't mean to be cynical, but I have a prediction for you. What they're going to do is they're going to indict this informant, and they're going to try to lay it all at the door of the informant. They're going to accuse him of doing everything wrong.
Right. 2 months later, William Braniff, the U.S. attorney, made a statement.
Today, a federal grand jury indicted Ronald B. Edmonds on 25 counts of making false statements in a matter within the jurisdiction of the government. As is clear from the indictment, it is the position of the government that the entire cocaine conspiracy relayed by the defendant was false.
It's clear from the search warrant and other documents that the government did virtually nothing. Almost no investigation to corroborate Ron's claims. They substituted one dubious man's word for old-fashioned police work. That blunder will scar Don Carlson for the rest of his life. He will have only limited use of his right arm and leg. His lungs have not returned to normal. He is, of course, suing the government.
You must be a terribly bitter man.
Morally, I am not bitter. Early on in the hospital, when I was struggling for my life, I told myself that I would not become bitter over this when what I needed to do is work towards getting my health back and getting out and getting my life back together.
At the same time, I understand
Can we
that.
stop a second?
Sure.
Yes.
And Ron Edmonds, the informant, well, he's been on the run since the end of January when the grand jury indicted him.
Okay, that was amazing, wasn't it?
Unbelievable.
Yes.
And you see, this should not only strike terror into the heart of every American, but especially to every seventh-day Sabbath keeper, because our prophet has told us that this is the stuff that's going to happen. We're not trying to scare our people. We're just trying to say, wake up, get ready.
Right. Now, this Cult Awareness Network and the Anti-Defamation League apparently were the ones, according to Tex Mars, who were afraid that Koresh would get a following, particularly the ADL, and they wanted him exterminated. That's why they didn't arrest him when he was out jogging, like he'd like to do on the back roads around Waco, or when he went into town and the people would see him there. They didn't arrest him. They wanted an open frontal attack. They chose not to knock at the door. They chose not to follow the course of letting the deputy sheriff, the report from the police who are resisting the New World Order that I was just reading, they said what should have happened was, first of all, they should have started at a low key with the local deputy sheriff going up, knocking at the door, and serving the search warrant.
Whoever heard of a search warrant being served by trailer loads of SWAT team driving up in concealed trailers and the thing coming back and the storming the house? Whoever heard of a search warrant for illegal for selling, what was it, 2 shotguns that were a quarter of an inch too short? You know, I think
that was the Randy Weaver case.
Oh, that's the Randy Weaver. Okay, I'm getting them mixed up.
He was entrapped, by the way, by the government into doing that.
Are we going to see that video of Jerry Spence and Tom
Yes,
Brokaw
absolutely.
here pretty soon?
Yes, we
okay,
will.
We'll show that later when we're talking about Randy Weaver. But whoever heard of having a search? I mean, what was it that David Koresh was being served with? A search warrant or?
Yes, a search warrant, as I understand it.
Whoever heard?
No one even knew what was in the warrant for weeks after they were supposed to have served it.
Unbelievable.
And the warrant itself shows and demonstrates that they knew what weapons he had. They knew what he had. Incidentally, they were running, even though we may not agree with this, they were running a ammo shop, near the mag bag apparently nearby, and they had some kind of a gun industry where they were selling, buying, purchasing, and selling, and that may account for some of the weapons that they had there. Also, notice this, that the UPS reported him. The UPS reported him, and government agents routinely go into UPS stations. Kornicki tells about this, how they have been witnessed. 5 agents at a time will go in, put on UPS clothes on almost a daily basis in some areas, and just randomly open packages. Your Fourth Amendment is being violated by these people through UPS. And it was UPS that reported him, you see. They opened a package and found a grenade in there. Well, I think it was Jan Markison that interviewed one of the ladies, the wife of one of the members there, and asked about that. And what they were doing was taking empty grenades and mounting them for wall plaques. But you see how this was misconstrued. Anyway.
Bob, you never told us what was the real reason for the raid on Waco.
Well, it appears that the Anti-Defamation League wanted this group annihilated. So it did not pose as a messianic threat.
So it was the Jews that were the ones that were initially behind the raid?
According to Tex Marr's research, and we understand, we have heard in some of our research that Janet Reno is a Jew also.
So not only is she a lesbian, but she's a Jew, and she is also the one who was responsible for the raid
for the burning of it down.
For the burning of
because only the president, you see, could order the CS gas. Only the president and Janet Reno could give permission for the CS gas to be used, and for, you see, tanks were used also against them. Anybody that they didn't like, they just ran over their cars with tanks. They took the $13,000 motorcycles out of the barn and ran over them. They ran over the kids' toys just to irritate, to drive them mad inside. But the testimony of these people that were interviewed was that their faith sustained them. They were asked, what was it like being there with the lights on at night and the screaming rabbits being played at you, being slaughtered, and the Tibetan chants and the rock music and all of that? They said, our faith transcended all of that.
This was from the interview on the ABC Dateline program by this woman who escaped the fire at Mount Carmel Center. Let's show that right now.
Yeah, okay. Let's show that.
From our studios in New York, here is Stone Phillips.
Good evening. James on assignment tonight. We begin with the Dateline exclusive, an insider's account of the final hours of David Koresh and his Branch Davidians. 7 weeks ago, when Koresh and most of his followers perished in flames, some said it was a mass suicide. There were comparisons to Jonestown. Tonight, one of the few survivors, Ruth Riddle, tells a far different story, and not just about the fiery end. The rumors of Koresh's sexual exploits, were they true? Did his followers really believe that he was the Messiah and they were living out Armageddon? Our first Dateline tonight, Waco, Texas.
The fire moved so fast that day. The wind was really blowing and the flames were leaping all around. There was fire above me, across the hall, I guess on both sides too. And when I realized the fire was so close, that's when I jumped.
Were people screaming? Were people calling for help? Did you hear voices in those final moments?
I heard some screaming, and it's a terrible, terrible way to die.
What happened at the Branch Davidian compound was one of the most violent incidents in American law enforcement history. More than 80 people died, including 17 children. 7 weeks later, this is all that remains. This and so many questions. Only 9 people survived the inferno and know what really happened inside the compound. From the bungled raid last February that left 4 federal agents dead, to the standoff that dragged on for 51 days. Ruth Riddle jumped from the second story moments before it was engulfed by the flames that killed her husband. Treated for second-degree burns and a broken ankle, she is now considered a material witness. For the last 7 weeks, she has told her story to no one, until now. On Sunday in Waco, she sat down with us for the first detailed account of that last day inside the compound and the events that led up to it, starting with the ill-fated raid last February. What do you remember about it?
Helicopters. Then firing. Lots of firing.
This is who, sir? David Koresh. Mount Carmel Center, we're being shot all up out here.
Okay, where are you?
Oh, where am I? I'm in Mount Carmel Center.
You can see how they were all ready to come in the way they did. Just, they were fully armed, and they knew that that's what they were going to do, was come on and shoot them up. We were all scared to death they were going to come back and shoot us some more. We stayed down on the ground for a long time.
Though federal agents that day were greeted with a barrage of automatic weapons fire, Ruth Riddle claims it was all in self-defense, and that Davidians were later charged unfairly.
The first 2 women who came out were charged with murder, and conspiracy to murder. 2 women in their 70s.
Those women were charged with murder because 4 federal agents were dead. We don't shoot at federal agents.
They shouldn't come shooting at us either.
In the exchange of gunfire that day, we knew that David Koresh was wounded. What's now clear is how serious his injuries were.
There was a pretty deep wound in his side. The bullet, I believe, went right through. Also in his hand. He lost 3 pints of blood and stayed in bed for days and days and days. And even towards the end, he was just barely starting to get up and walk around.
But Koresh was always a powerful presence, and according to Ruth, not the deranged cult leader many assumed him to be. To her, he was a holy man whose prophecies about the end of the world drew her to the Branch Davidians. Born in Canada, Ruth first visited the group's Waco headquarters in 1981 at age 19. Over the next 10 years, she made regular visits to the compound, and in 1992, she made it her home. What made you decide this is where you wanted to spend your life?
I saw that there was things that could be taught by David that nobody else could teach, and that is the 7 seals. And nobody else could, and so we were preparing ourselves for the fulfillment of God's word.
The 7 seals being from the book of Revelations.
Yes.
Talk about the apocalypse, the end.
He could take you to depths you wouldn't know. If you studied a certain book and chapter, or whole books at a time, 66 chapters. After you got that understanding, he could take you to another level and another level. He had great depth and understanding, great insight.
Do you believe he was God?
No, I believe he could show us who God was by the scriptures.
As for charges that Koresh used his command of the scriptures to sleep with any woman he wanted and control the sex lives of everyone in the compound, Ruth says it simply isn't true. Is it true that husbands were not permitted to have sexual relationships with their own wives?
No.
That's not true?
No. It was totally up to the couples what they wanted to do.
In fact, Ruth says she and her husband were planning to have children. Another subject we should address, David and the children. We've heard he went way too far when it came to discipline.
That's
Is that
not true? Definitely not.
What was the helper?
The helper is a small wooden, like, paddle. It's a rice paddle. Japanese would be familiar with it, and it was used if necessary when the children needed some discipline. But
let me read you something from the front page of the New York Times last month. Cult children tell of abuses. For sins as small as spilling milk, the children said, they were struck with a wooden paddle known as the helper. David Koresh told them to call their parents dogs. Only he was to be referred to as their father. Girls as young as 11 were given a plastic Star of David signifying that they had the light and were ready to have sex with the cult leader.
like I said, it's all lies. I don't know where they got that stuff.
Doctors who looked at the kids who came out said some of the girls had lesions on their buttocks. These weren't spankings, these were beatings, and that these kids were living in a perpetual state of fear, worried about displeasing David Koresh.
That's not true. The parents had discipline as well as whoever was in a situation with the children and needed to discipline them, but the children were loved more than anything. They were the joy of all of us there.
Why all the guns? Why the seeming obsession with firearms and weapons?
I don't know that it was an obsession. I know that we had certain things that we would have the right to protect ourselves with if anything ever happened, and also there was a business that David was conducting with selling firearms.
But we're not talking about bearing arms. We're talking about stockpiling enormous amounts of weapons. 59 handguns, 12 shotguns, 94 rifles, 45 machine guns, 1.8 million rounds of ammunition, a dozen silencers, more than 3 dozen assault rifles, including AK-47s. What was going on?
I didn't know of these things, and I don't. How did they know that we had these things? I mean,
these were from court papers. Why a gun business? I mean, if you wanted to make money, why not a cake sale or arts and crafts? Why weapons?
Well, the right to bear arms is constitutional.
There's no denying the compound was well armed, and as the standoff wore on, federal agents, keeping their distance, resorted to some highly unusual tactics, blasting the compound nightly with floodlights and loud music, hoping to rattle the Davidians and break their spirit.
I'm sure they thought they were using psychological warfare on us.
I guess the idea with the music and the light was to keep you from sleeping.
I wore earplugs when it, at night.
So it didn't keep you from sleeping at all? Were any of those tactics working?
No.
The spotlights, the music?
No. Our faith is what keeps us going.
Did you have any sense of what was going on outside the fence, outside the compound, about the force that was being assembled against you?
Well, we could see the tanks, and we knew that there was a lot of people that had come in the initial raid.
Did you have a sense for what a media circus this had become?
Oh, yeah, we could see the satellite city, as they called it, and that there was quite a few people down there.
What was your reaction to all of that?
We felt that this would provide us, David, an opportunity to get the message out in great detail.
So you were going to turn this adversity into an opportunity.
Exactly.
Good comes from bad.
Uh-huh.
Right out of the Bible. Except it didn't work out that way.
No. They backed down on their agreements, and they lost patience, force. Whoever heard of Americans using tanks against Americans on American soil?
Authorities said they were concerned that if they let this thing go on much longer, that kids would have starved to death or might have died from disease given the unsanitary conditions inside.
We all kept ourselves very clean, and we had plenty of food to eat to sustain us.
How long could you have lasted? How long could you have held out given your food and other supplies?
6 months.
Another 6 months or so. During the 51-day siege, was there much dissent? Was there arguing inside about what we should do, what we shouldn't do? Should we give up? Should we not give up? Were there discussions? Was it a democracy? Who was making the decisions? We
were all well aware of what was going on, to the extent that we were backing what David wanted to do and turn the bad situation around to a good one.
So in some strange way, what we all perceived to have been great hardship during this 51-day siege were the best of times.
Exactly.
In some way for you.
The very best. Some of my best times. Companionship was closer. Our commitment was stronger. Our desire to study was more. And the more we studied, the more we could see how plainly what David had taught.
For David Koresh and most of the Branch Davidians, it all came to a shocking end on April 19th. But not for Ruth Riddle.
I remember hearing crackling type voices coming over the speaker. It was hard to make out what they were saying. Some kind of warning of some sort. And next thing we knew that they were ramming into the building. The building was being knocked around. And then popping sounds as they threw the tear gas, shot the tear gas in.
Did you think you were being attacked? Was there a sense that they were going to come in after you?
That's what it was like.
When it became obvious that everyone could burn to death, why didn't more people leave?
I believe that they couldn't get out. Where the buildings were rammed was where staircases were.
Was anyone, to your knowledge, shot trying to escape?
Oh, no. That's ludicrous. Nobody would be trying to escape except from the fire, and they couldn't.
What about the fact that 11 of the bodies have been found with gunshot wounds to the head?
Well, given the fact that they may have felt trapped, they may have opted for that rather than burning to death. That's a terrible way to die.
Was this a mass suicide?
No. There was no talk of suicide. This thing about Jonestown was not what we had going on.
As for claims from the FBI that it was Koresh himself who ordered his followers to set the fire, Ruth says she just can't believe it's true. Only 9 people escaped the fire. You are one of them. What happened after you jumped out of the window?
Some FBI or ATF agents came over and grabbed my arms and asked me if I was okay and started leading me toward the tank.
One of the agents who ran over to you says you were fighting him off, trying to go back into the compound. Were you trying to get back into the building?
I knew the building was on fire. I didn't want to burn up. That's why I jumped.
But you didn't want to leave.
I knew how the people that had left had been treated. And I knew that that it was going to be tough.
Of everything that you went through that day, what's the most vivid, the most haunting memory you have?
I guess the sight of looking back and seeing the building in flames and them asking me about people, where they were, and it was so obvious to me they were obviously burning up. I looked over at the building in flames. I just thought, oh, all those people. Such a tragedy it didn't have to be.
Ruth Riddle is living in a Waco halfway house and is expected to testify soon before a grand jury. The Justice Department is also investigating this entire episode.
It was her faith.
Yes, it was her faith.
That was their faith that sustained
What a testimony.
them. What a testimony.
I mean, I thought, what would it be like? How would you like being kept up all night with Tibetan chants and screaming rabbits that are being slaughtered and all this psychological warfare? But their faith, that's a real inspiration.
Yeah, amen.
In fact, there was a pastor up in the northern part of the Midwest, a non-Adventist pastor, that asked his congregation, how many of you would be prepared to die for your faith like those people? And the congregation just went, you could hear a pin drop. They were scared to be even confronted with the possibility. But here is an article. This is in Soldier of Fortune magazine. They have been bold enough to publish some of these things. What the feds don't want you to know about Waco. The fix is on as government attempts to hide the truth about ranch apocalypse fiasco. While many in Waco turned their backs on surviving Branch Davidians, mostly women and children with no clothes or homes, ATF undertook a billboard propaganda campaign belying deepening controversy over disastrous 28 February raid. At least 12 such signs were erected in and around Waco after the April 19 conflagration. All such billboards remained surprisingly unvandalized as Soldier of Fortune went to press.
Bob, let me ask you a question. Where does the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists play in to this Jewish conspiracy along with the Anti-Defamation League and Janet Reno?
Well,
where does the GC fit into this?
We know that about a year before all of this happened, Shirley Burton from the General Conference had given a number of press releases, and it was known that she had contacted the BATF or FBI, I forget which it was, or maybe both, to alert them about the Branch Davidians. And so that's about all I know, except for the fact that the structure has consistently supported the government action there and tried to use the Branch Davidians as a whipping boy that they can identify the independents with, you see.
Exactly what they've done.
You see, this is exactly what they do.
Just a
they have fallen
barrage.
right into
I mean,
all
a barrage of union presidents, periodicals, all tying in the the true and faithful independent ministries with the group at Waco.
Now, at the meeting out in Santa Rosa, I read a lot of information about this Waco thing.
That was a great sermon, Bob.
And so I'm not going to go over that now. The people can order that separately.
Okay, now, folks, if you don't have that tape, that sermon that Bob preached at our Santa Rosa camp meeting, Santa Rosa, California, back in August, you need to get that tape. You can order it from our mailroom. Just ask for the Waco sermon that Bob Trefz gave at the Rosa camp meeting. I think it's available for $4 or something.
Now, what's emerging, the picture that is emerging now, as people are investigating this, is that these, of course, their cover was blown. You know, for one thing, they asked one of the Branch Davidians, they didn't know who he was, how to get to the place. They didn't even know the phone number of the place. And they asked him how to get to the place. I guess he was a mail carrier or something like that. And he immediately took off and told Koresh. And Koresh knew that he had undercover agents from the BATF there among him, but he was trying to convert them.
Judas.
He gave them Bible studies, and even one of them, Rodriguez, I think was his name, as I recall, was there as the raid was about to begin. And when Koresh found out about it, he shook Rodriguez's hand like a real gentleman, and he said, I guess you'll have to be going now, but good luck to you. I mean, it's amazing. Wow. And then here they come with their cattle trailers, you know, and all of these scores and scores of men that had just flooded the motels, all dressed in their gear with all their weapons and everything. And you can show that, John, in that Linda Thompson video, what happened. And the evidence now is that the ATF men came out of they were scared. They were scared. They had been so psyched up about this. They came out of the horse trailers just screaming. And they came out, and they were the ones that fired the first shots. And David Koresh came to the door, opened the door, and he held up his hand and he said, "Please stop. What are you doing? There's women and children in here. Let's talk." And their response was to fire at him. And he jumped back in and he slammed the door shut.
They shot him in the hand,
and the bullets came through the door, and he was quite seriously wounded.
You know, the media didn't tell us this, Bob.
No,
this isn't the
it's
story
a
we
completely
got on
different
CNN
picture.
at all.
Completely different picture. And then those who have analyzed the video footage and all say, well, Linda Thompson shows how there was no return fire coming back. For about 5 minutes, apparently, there was no return fire, and some people are even questioning whether there was very much at all. Meanwhile, notice what this article says. Of the allegations of government misconduct in Waco previously reported, new information confirms the following. 1, whether deliberately or by accident, an ATF agent fired the first shot that started the gunfight on 28 February. Number 2, gunfire from government agents in helicopters struck the building, wounding some of its inhabitants. And 3, the ATF knew there would be no element of surprise. Some new twists. A, Koresh knew as far back as 8 months before the raid that he was being scrutinized by ATF, actually inviting them through a third party to inspect his home. I mean, what? This guy was unusual that way, I would say, compared to most people. B, ATF made a decision not to question Koresh or peacefully arrest him in a neutral location, but to conduct a raid. You can read all about it in that government report, the 500-page government report. C, ATF security was sloppy. I tell you, they really do ream out the BATF for their operation there. It was a very sloppy operation. On 3 occasions in August 1992, agents practiced forced entry drills on an uninhabited farmhouse in plain view of Branch Davidians working near Mount Carmel. After ATF agents left a practice site at nearby Fort Hood, U.S. Army personnel there found dropped copies of ATF's operations plan. D, at least 3, if not all, of 5 Branch Davidians killed in the initial raid were unarmed. ATF snipers shot people they knew were unarmed. Now, these are facts that have emerged according to this article.
Wow.
And E, all bets are off on how the final fire started. Well, we know now from Linda Thompson's video, which has shown how the fire got started.
And this is a national magazine.
Oh, yeah, Soldier of Fortune magazine.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
This is a national magazine that is willing to put it on the line and put this in print.
Now, the Houston lawyers that are representing the Davidians are Dick DeGuerin, who is representing Koresh, and Jack Zimmerman. Both of these are pretty formidable attorneys, as I understand it. DeGuerin is considered to be one of the best trial lawyers, apparently, in Texas. Zimmerman went on to tell how Paul Gray, the supposedly independent arson investigator whose report concluded that Branch Davidians used gasoline to set the 19 April fire, is married to an employee in ATF's Houston office. Hardly independent. The couple socialized with Mrs. Gray's colleague, ATF agent Steve Willis, who was the first agent killed in the Waco fire gunfight. Paul Gray and his wife attended Willis's funeral. But the most important thing, said Zimmerman, the attorney, is that from 1982 to 1990, Gray's office was on Imperial Valley Drive in the ATF office. That's where he officed. He carried a card that identified himself as a special agent of the ATF. And then they say he's an independent investigator.
Yeah, right.
He handed that card out to people when he interviewed witnesses. I don't know if he got his paycheck from the fire department or not, but he identified himself as an ATF agent. Of all the independent fire examiners they have in these United States, why didn't they pick someone from Chicago or Philadelphia, New York, Miami, California, posed Zimmerman. Why do they pick a guy from Houston who worked in the ATF office until 3 years ago, who's married to an ATF employee?
Totally unbiased.
Who, I understand, may have had something to do with typing the warrant.
Yeah, right. Talk about a fair appraisal. Don't you know that was?
Well,
Talk about a stacked deck.
I'm going to skip down here. Under an international treaty signed by the United States, American troops are not allowed to use CS against, that CS gas, against enemy soldiers unless the move is specifically approved by our president. Following the tragedy, Reno gave 3 justifications for trying to force residents from the Davidian compound with battering rams and CS, a finely powdered chemical riot control agent. Incidentally, in an enclosed room, this gas is supposed to be able to kill a person in 8 minutes. There are pictures on Linda Thompson's video of recruits, Army recruits, staggering along, holding on to each other, barely able to function, who've been exposed to this gas. The Attorney General said they had hard evidence of recent beatings of the children within a week before the April 19th attack, Zimmerman recalled. I challenge the FBI and I challenge Reno to come forward with the evidence that there had been recent beatings, because Dick DeGuerin and I were in there within the final 2 weeks and we didn't see any evidence of that at all. Both of us are fathers. Zimmerman noted we were looking for the physical evidence of the murder allegations that we were to defend, but the children were in those rooms and we saw most of them. We talked to some of them. You could tell by the way they were dressed and the way they were. You could tell they were well fed, they were clean, and they were well adjusted. They smiled, they talked to us. Nobody shrank back from us. And I remember even the news media, you know, at times little things slip out. When the children were released at one point, some of the children, they were just marveling at how well-behaved, nice children, far better than in the public schools these kids were. And here is the description of what happened here at the beginning. The first gunshot was fired at David Koresh's head and missed. This is DeGuerin speaking. By an ATF agent who was charging. Koresh was at the front window. He saw these two cattle trailers behind pickup trucks roaring down the driveway at breakneck speed. You can imagine what these poor jerks in the back of the trailers were doing, trying to hold on for dear life, scared. And then the backs open up and the men start screaming out of there, screaming at the top of their lungs, not screaming, we're the ATF. This is a raid, not that, just screaming. So Koresh stepped out on the porch, held up his hand and said, wait, go back. There are women and children in here. Let's talk about this. That was confirmed by a number of people who heard him say that. Now, this is the attorney speaking. The next thing is a bullet hits right by his head, DeGuerin continued, and then a fusillade of bullets was fired. There was the first one, a pause, and then a fusillade of bullets. Zimmerman was adamant that the ATF's version, with Koresh smiling at agents through a partially open door, then closing it as a signal for shooters inside to open fire, is a lie. People have said to me, can you believe the Davidians? How do you know? Let me tell you what I saw, Zimmerman said. I saw the two front doors, hollow metal doors peppered with holes. How could they have gotten there? Anyway.
Bob, here's the thing. You may not agree with everything that David Koresh did and what he stood for and his theology and everything else, but you've got to look at what our government did, and that we could very well be the next ones.
Anybody could be.
Anybody could. Anybody is a, you know, these people's freedoms, the Constitution was thrown out the window. They had no rights. Just imagine if this had happened to you. And just imagine if you had a horse trailers, cattle trailers full of ATF agents that roared up into your front yard, jumping out of those things with submachine guns and all the stuff, the arsenal that they had, dressed up in fatigue, SWAT team camouflage, and come charging towards your house. I mean, what would you do?
It's terrible. It is absolutely, and it reminds me once again of this quote. In Germany, the Nazis first came for the communists. We could put in the Branch Davidians.
Sure. Oh, they
and
were
I
just a
didn't speak up because I wasn't.
Yeah.
They were a cult.
They were a cult.
And the media referred to them as dead cult members.
Yeah, right.
They were depersonalized. You see, this is a psychological device.
Good point. Dead cult members. They were human. Instead, they depersonalized them.
Yeah. They were made like they were subhumans.
They were animals.
Yeah, they were like subhumans. The same thing they did with the Jews in Germany.
Boy, that's so true. I never realized that before. That's exactly what they did.
And yet, when an ATF man died, they were martyred for the patriotism.
And we saw in Linda Thompson's video where it was very likely that it was another ATF agent that killed those three that had gone in through the window.
That's right.
And it was all planned.
Yes. Oh, I must bring something else in here, John.
That they planned on.
I must bring something else.
Those three ATF personnel that went in through that window on the roof were the sacrificial lambs of the ATF. They were sacrificed. They were martyred that day.
Do you know?
They killed them.
Do you know what Attorney Thompson found out? All three of those men that you're talking about were in Clinton's bodyguard during his campaign. Now, I have here a transcript, a paper put out by Linda Thompson, this attorney. She has her doctorate. Her field is constitutional law. And she has found, she was tipped off by a CIA agent and an FBI agent. They said, Linda, you need to investigate how many people have died around Bill Clinton in the last year. And she found out that 21 people have died mysterious, unnatural deaths that were close to Clinton.
21 people who have been close to Bill and Hillary have now mysteriously disappeared.
In accidents, usually.
Died in, quote, accidents.
Yeah.
Now, what would you draw from that, Bob?
Well, they apparently knew too much about something. Listen to this. In investigating events surrounding the massacre at Waco, I have made some rather startling discoveries. For instance, I discovered that 3 of the 4 ATF agents killed during the initial siege at Waco had been Bill Clinton's bodyguards during his presidential campaign. Film footage from the initial siege, which can be seen in the videotape Waco, the Big Lie, and you have that, John, shows an ATF agent throwing a grenade and shooting a machine gun into the room where 3 other ATF agents have just entered a window. In other words, this footage appears to show that these agents were assassinated. In the March 3, 1993 Dallas Morning News, all 3 of the agents who went into the window on the roof of the Branch Davidian house at Mount Carmel were reported by the ATF to have been killed inside. This certainly seemed curious, as did the connections to Waco of numerous highly placed government officials. Curiouser and curiouser, she writes. A former CIA agent and a former FBI agent both told me to begin checking into the body count around Hillary and Bill Clinton during Clinton's rise to governor of Arkansas and since he has become president. With just a little preliminary research of the period just prior to the election through the president, I found 21 people who knew Clinton personally, many of whom he knew intimately, and several who had been his escorts or bodyguards, all of whom had died under mysterious circumstances or had been killed in accidental airplane or helicopter crashes. This is not including the 96 Branch Davidians murdered in Waco, Texas, February 28, 1993 through April 19, 1993. And then she talks about each one of them. She goes through, I mean, she is an attorney, and I don't suppose you want to listen to all of this, but I have page after page now describing the circumstances under which all of these people died. She is very meticulous, very careful, all documented, and most interesting.
We're not getting the truth here. But as I go around the country, I'm speaking, this is actually the smallest group, I'm not insulting you or anything, but just to give you an idea that you're not alone, this is the smallest group I've spoken to in about 6 months. We're filling big rooms, 5,000 people. And everybody is of like mind. They've had it. They're not taking the lies anymore. They're not listening to the lies anymore, and they want answers and they want to know what to do. I started out when we made Waco the Big Lie. At the end it says, write your congressman and write us. Well, a lot of people wrote their congressman and then they wrote us and sent us copies, and all the congressmen's letters say pretty much the same thing. Yes, Waco was a terrible tragedy. Thank you for your concern. Take a hike. We're not getting any reaction from Congress other than just a handful of congressmen. And all of those congressmen have been co-opted. One way or another, coerced, threatened. What does that tell you about the state of our country? Bill Clinton is directly connected to gun and drug running, as was George Bush. George Bush pardoned 7 people before he stepped down. Now, it's very difficult to pardon someone who's never been convicted of a crime, but that's exactly what he did do. Those 7 people, as you know, were under the process of being indicted for money laundering. We didn't change parties. We didn't even really change presidents. We just changed facilitators. Bill Clinton is a facilitator, and he's a better facilitator than George Bush was. He's moving faster, he's doing more, but that's good because the signs are there now for more people to see what is going on. I haven't seen the little stickers on the backs of road signs here in Florida. I don't know that they're here, but please look for them. As you're driving down the highway, and it won't be an interstate usually, it'll be a state road, look on the left-hand side of the road, on the backs of road signs. Any of you that travel, look in other states. You'll find them. I can tell you states you can definitely find them would be Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Utah, and Texas. Those are states where I have personally found them. These little stickers, they're reflective color-coded stickers. Now, Don't be confused by the stickers that states put on their signs when they update them. Those kind of stickers will have, you know, a date and a county agency or something on them. That's not what I'm talking about. These stickers are bright, reflective stickers. They have no markings on them at all. And they come in blue, red, orange, white, brown, green. Triangles, rectangles, squares, circles, and with little cutout holes in some of them. These are troop movement markers. We're finding these in states where the states have been gridded off into global positioning satellite. It has another name that I could never pronounce. But in any event, the states have gone to this. Their mile markers have been redone. Bridge markers have been redone. And before you come to a bridge, you'll find an elevation marker. A spotter could stand at that bridge and say, elevation so-and-so. And the bridge could be quickly blown. This sounds like science fiction, it sounds like lunacy, but we've been working on this for months. The blue ones in Utah blue squares lead to missile sites. In Indiana, the blue ones lead to what look like concentration camps or internment camps or places to hold large groups of people. The brown ones are near military bases. We haven't uncoded any of the others. We need help doing that. Please do it. We'd like to know what they mean, and after we know what they mean, take them off the signs.
Amen.
These people that are here tonight, every one of us care about this country, care about our Constitution, and care about what's happening. I've had entire rooms full of policemen that have seen the tape at roll call come and say, what can we do? Now, FinCEN, I want you to understand what FinCEN is. Anybody that doesn't know, it's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's a 92-computer database that's been set up in Vienna, Virginia, and they're urging that every agency of any government subscribe to it. And if you call up there and ask them, what can you get for this service, it's basically all information that's ever been computerized about you, period. Your 10 nearest neighbors, your social security number, your spouse's social security number, all your credit information, all your IRS information, customs information, your dog tags. I mean your dog, Bow Wow dog. Your military service records. Anything that's ever been computerized is accessible through this huge database. We did not change presidents, we changed facilitators. Webster Hubble was one of the partners in the law firm with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Vince Foster. Vince Foster is the man that supposedly committed suicide. He did not commit suicide, he was murdered. The gun that was found in his hand had no serial number. It was a Colt revolver. Colts have had serial numbers since the 1800s except for a series issued to the CIA. His car was not found in the park where he was found. He left no suicide note. A suicide note materialized 3 days later in his briefcase that had already been searched item by item. The park rangers investigated his death, and they were instructed by Janet Reno and Bill Clinton to investigate his death as a suicide. Now, any policeman can tell you, you do not investigate anything as anything. You investigate it for the cause of death. If this was Bill Clinton's good friend, and if you were president of the United States and one of your best friends that you've known since 8th grade just got found in a park with a gun in his hand that he didn't own, in a suit, with his car not around, and you could command every police force in this country to look into it, would you give it to the park rangers? Now, the documents that they're asking for from Bill Clinton, they originally said they don't exist, we don't know anything about them. Bill and Hillary said, we don't know about them, they don't exist. Now they're saying, well, yeah, they exist, but you can't have them. And once threatened with an independent prosecutor, they said, oh no, don't do that, we'll give them to you after we go through them. Now this is the story that has changed over and over and over again on these documents that Vince Foster had. But what Vince Foster was trying to do at the time that he was murdered was reconstruct Bill and Hillary Clinton's financial records. Vince Foster was their financial advisor in Arkansas during the time period that Webster Hubbell was getting these loans for his son-in-law, which was through a program that Bill Clinton developed. Webster Hubbell, remember, was one of the senior partners in the same law firm as Vince Foster, Bill Clinton, and Hillary Clinton, and Mack McLarty. Another name to remember, Mack McLarty is Chief of Staff at the White House. Mack McLarty has a bachelor's degree, but he has the most powerful position in the country. He has been with Clinton for a long time, and coincidentally, he was the last person to speak to Vince Foster by phone before he was found dead. He was also the last person to speak to a fellow named Tully, one of Clinton's campaign fundraisers before he was found dead, and to yet another fellow named Shepard before he was found dead. I've done a body count around Bill Clinton, and there have been 12 of his bodyguards and 14 other people that have all died, none of them from natural causes, since he took office. Every single one of these people had some connection to either his finances, directly to his finances in most cases, or to his military plans for the UN. We saw 4 state troopers come forward recently trying to tell us how the Secret Service was used to pimp for Bill Clinton and how they were offered jobs not to talk. It's my understanding that they came forward because they didn't want to die. I hope we see more of those people, but as always, now that they've come forward, they're being investigated. They're turning it around on them. They assigned one of these officers to narcotics to guarantee he could be shot in the street dead. One thing I'm just now starting to investigate is why so many of the heads of the National Guard and reserve units, we're talking generals, since November of '92, have died in crashes, plane crashes, helicopter crashes. Little girl that's in one of my son's classes, he's 15, she's 15. Her dad was the head of the Indiana National Guard. He was killed in a plane crash going to Alaska with some other heads of National Guard units. Why did Indiana National Guard need to go to Alaska? That's right, it's real easy to rig a plane crash.